The package sat on Alex's doorstep like a silent, oversized question mark. It wasn't the usual cardboard delivery, marked with a familiar logo and a tracking number. This one was wrapped in thick, brown butcher paper, tied with rough twine, and so heavily taped it looked more like a sealed relic than a simple delivery. There was no label, no return address, nothing to say who had left it or why. For a man who lived his quiet, predictable life in the peaceful suburban town of Woodview, this was a profoundly unsettling object. It felt wrong, out of place, a physical anomaly on his welcome mat. Alex, a reserved man in his late 30s who worked as a software engineer, had just finished his workout and was grabbing a coffee when he first saw it. His first thought was a simple mistake, that it was meant for a neighbor, but a quick glance up and down the street revealed nothing similar. On any other porch, the package seemed to belong to him, but in a way that screamed of secrecy and intent. From his living room window, Alex felt the familiar, unnerving gaze of his neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She was a woman who could make a simple glance feel like an inquisition. Mrs. Gable was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood rules, an unofficial member of the HOA who had once lectured Alex for a solid 10 minutes on the precise angle his lawn sprinklers were watering the sidewalk. She saw regulations not as guidelines, but as personal decrees, and she now stood at her window, a silhouette framed by her pristine curtains, judging the suspicious parcel with the same fierce intensity she judged any imperfection in the community. Alex knew that anything out of the ordinary was a personal offense to her, and this package was a major one. He cautiously stepped onto his porch, the cool autumn air sweeping in. He knelt, not daring to touch the object, and tried to gather any information he could. It smelled faintly of cardboard and something earthy, like hay, and when he pressed his ear against it, he heard a faint, rustling noise from inside. A chill of genuine fear ran down his spine. The fear wasn't about what was inside. It was about the unknown, the fact that something so out of place had appeared at his quiet, ordinary home, under the watchful eye of a woman who would not hesitate to involve the authorities. He stood up, pulling out his phone. His thumb hovered over the numbers for the local police's non-emergency line, but he hesitated. What would he even say? "Hi, my neighbor left a suspicious box on my porch, and now I'm freaking out." The potential embarrassment of overreacting felt worse than the fear itself. He decided he would just wait for the person who left it to come back, or perhaps for a delivery driver to return with the correct label. He went back inside, trying to calm his nerves and convince himself that this was just a simple, albeit bizarre, misunderstanding. An hour passed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the street. Alex was trying to watch a baseball game, but his eyes kept drifting to the window. The box was still there, a dark, unsettling lump on his welcome mat. Then he saw it, Mrs. Gable, standing on her porch, holding her phone to her ear. She was talking, her mouth moving in a flurry of silent indignation, her eyes locked on his front door. She gesticulated wildly with her free hand, pointing at the package, then back at his house, her every movement a declaration of a neighborhood crisis. Alex felt a surge of cold panic. He knew what she was doing. She wasn't just making a friendly call to a relative, she was reporting him. She was painting this innocuous situation as a threat, and she was making him the central figure in her little drama. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood air. They were getting closer, the sound growing louder with every passing second. The flashing red and blue lights painted the front of his living room with an eerie glow as a police cruiser, followed by a second, turned onto their street. An officer got out of the first car, his hand resting on his holster, and a second one began to set up a perimeter tape, their faces stern and serious. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew this was all because of his nosy, overzealous neighbor. He was now at the center of a very public, very tense misunderstanding, and he had no idea what was about to happen next, or how he could ever explain the simple fact that he had no idea what was inside that package. The flashing red and blue lights painted Alex's meticulously kept lawn with a chaotic, pulsing glow, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across his windows. To officers, Officer Davis, a stoic woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, and Officer Miller, a younger man trying to maintain a serious face, approached his porch. Behind them, Mrs. Gable stood on her own manicured lawn, arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction mixed with righteous indignation plastered across her face. She was practically vibrating with the importance of the moment, occasionally pointing dramatically towards Alex's doorstep as if to reinforce the danger. Alex, still reeling from the sudden spectacle, opened his front door, stepping out with his hands slightly raised in a gesture of surrender and confusion. "Evening. Sir, we received a call about a suspicious package on your property, officer," Davis stated, her voice calm but firm, her eyes scanning the brown-wrapped bundle. Officer Miller positioned himself slightly to her side, his gaze fixed on the package. Alex swallowed, his throat dry. "Yes, officer, I just noticed it myself a little while ago. I was actually about to call, but it looked so harmless." Almost, Mrs. Gable scoffed audibly from across the street. "Harmless, Mr. Peterson, it's unlabeled. And it's been there for hours. A responsible citizen would have alerted the authorities immediately." Alex clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. He knew arguing with Mrs. Gable was like wrestling a greased pig in quicksand. Impossible and messy. Officer Davis ignored Mrs. Gable, keeping her focus on Alex and the package. "Sir, can you confirm you didn't order anything that might resemble this?" she asked. "Absolutely not, officer. I have no idea where it came from or who it's for. I was going to give it some time, thinking maybe a delivery service made a mistake." Officer Miller knelt down cautiously, keeping a safe distance, and used a gloved hand to gently prod the package. He heard the faint rustle that Alex had noticed earlier. "Doesn't feel like electronics, Chief. Seems soft," he murmured. Glancing at Officer Davis, the air crackled with a strange mix of apprehension and absurdity. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion and the flashing lights, began to peek out from behind their curtains or gather cautiously at the end of their driveways. Mrs. Gable preened, as if directing a grand theatrical production. Just then, a slightly larger, unmarked vehicle pulled up, and a man in a protective vest, carrying a specialized toolkit, emerged. "Bomb squad's here, officers," he announced, his voice deep and calm. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering neighbors, and Mrs. Gable's chest puffed out even further. Alex's stomach dropped. This was getting ridiculously out of hand, all because of a peculiar package and an overly vigilant neighbor. The technician, who introduced himself as Detective Riley, approached the package with methodical precision, his eyes sharp and analytical. He laid out a tarp, put on a thicker pair of gloves, and began to carefully examine the bundle. Alex watched, mesmerized and mortified, as Detective Riley pulled out a small, specialized knife. With a swift, precise movement, Detective Riley cut through the heavy twine and then delicately sliced open the outer layer of butcher paper. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mrs. Gable had gone silent, leaning forward slightly, her mouth agape. The paper peeled back slowly, revealing soft, colorful fabric, and then a small, squeaky toy, and then a bag of what looked like dry pet food. Detective Riley carefully pulled back more of the paper, revealing a neatly packed assortment of blankets, several chew toys, small bags of treats, and what appeared to be bags of kibble. There was no bomb, no dangerous device, no illicit substances, just a collection of items clearly intended for animals. A wave of bewildered relief washed over Alex, quickly followed by a flush of embarrassment. He let out a nervous, almost hysterical chuckle. Officer Davis let out a small, quiet sigh a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Officer Miller actually chuckled aloud, shaking his head. Mrs. Gable, however, looked as if she'd been slapped. Her face went from smug triumph to utter mortification in a fraction of a second. She sputtered, What is that?" A pet donation. But it was so suspicious. Who would just leave something like that?" Her voice, usually so sharp and commanding, was now thin and reedy. Detective Riley, with a bemused expression, looked up from the now open package. "Looks like a very generous donation to an animal shelter, ma'am," he stated dryly, pulling out a small, handwritten note nestled among the blankets. He unfolded it and read aloud, "For the wonderful animals at Willow Creek Shelter. Hope these bring comfort and joy. A friend." He then looked pointedly at Mrs. Gable. "No bomb, no threat, just blankets and chew toys." The neighbors, who had been holding their breath, now let out collective sighs, some murmuring, others openly laughing. The absurdity of the situation hung heavy in the air. Alex couldn't help but look at Mrs. Gable, whose face had turned a deep shade of crimson. Her eyes darted around, trying to find an escape from the dozens of eyes now focused on her, not as the hero who averted a crisis, but as the instigator of an embarrassing, over-the-top misunderstanding. The air, once thick with fear, was now filled with the silent, awkward echoes of Mrs. Gable's very public blunder. The flashing lights that had bathed Alex's house in a chaotic, pulsating glow finally went dark. The officers, with a few final, weary glances at Mrs. Gable, who had now retreated into her home, slamming the door shut with a final, defeated thud, packed up their gear and exchanged quiet words with Alex. "Well, Mr. Peterson," Officer Davis said, handing him the handwritten note, "looks like you've got a very generous new friend. We'll file this under good intentions. Poor delivery. Good evening." The absurdity of the situation lingered in the air as their cruiser pulled away. Alex stood alone on his porch, surrounded by the remnants of the spectacle, a neatly folded tarp on the ground, a single police glove discarded near a bush, and the now open box of blankets and pet food. The handful of neighbors who had lingered at the end of their driveways returned to their homes, their whispers and chuckles following them inside. With a deep sigh, Alex picked up the note. It was a simple, slightly shaky cursive, "For the wonderful animals at Willow Creek Shelter. Hope these bring comfort and joy. A friend." He looked at the contents of the box. A brand new squeaky toy, a fleece blanket, a bag of premium kibble. This was a substantial donation, not some afterthought. The person had clearly put a lot of care into it. A wave of profound shame washed over him. Here he was, a man who had almost called the police on a complete stranger's act of kindness. He was no better than Mrs. Gable. She had seen suspicion, but he had seen a nuisance. He realized that in the chaos, he had completely lost sight of the fact that this package was a gift, a loving gesture. The weight of that realization settled heavy on his shoulders. The next morning, Alex decided he had to do something. He couldn't just let the box sit there. He needed to understand. He found the address for the Willow Creek Animal Shelter from the note and drove there, the box of supplies carefully placed in his passenger seat. The shelter was a cozy, modest building with a yard full of happy yelping dogs, a kind-faced woman with a name tag that read Linda. Volunteer coordinator greeted him. Alex explained the whole bizarre story, feeling the embarrassment rise in his cheeks as he recounted the police, the bomb squad, and his infamous neighbor. Linda listened with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. When he showed her the note, her face lit up with a knowing smile. "I know who this is from," she said softly. "This is Arthur's handwriting. He donates every few months, but this is the first time he's left something so big." Linda explained that Arthur was a quiet, elderly man who had recently lost his wife, Eleanor. For over 40 years, Eleanor had been the shelter's most dedicated volunteer. She would come every single day, bringing treats, cleaning cages, and giving love to every animal that passed through. The shelter was her whole world, After she passed away from a sudden illness, Arthur was heartbroken. He couldn't bring himself to come to the shelter. The memories were too painful. But he still wanted to help the animals that his wife had loved so dearly. Linda's voice grew, soft with emotion as she continued, "This donation. This is his way of continuing her legacy, of showing his love for her through the animals she cherished." Alex felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of his own parents, of the small, silent ways his father showed his love for his mother. The anonymous package wasn't an act of carelessness, it was a deeply personal, almost sacred tribute. Linda then explained why Arthur had left it so abruptly. "Arthur uses a walker now. He's very frail. He told me he couldn't manage to bring a big box like that to the door, and he didn't want to bother anyone to help. So he just drove over, left it on the doorstep, and hoped one of us would see it and bring it in." The simple, heartbreaking logic of it struck Alex hard. It wasn't about being suspicious. It was about an old man's love and his quiet dignity, his refusal to be a burden on others. All this time, they had been so focused on the how that they had completely missed the beautiful why. Linda went on to explain that Arthur had wanted to make the delivery in secret, believing that an anonymous donation was pure, without the need for thanks or recognition. He simply wanted to do a good thing for his Eleanor and for the animals. Alex looked at the dogs and cats playing happily in their pens and felt an overwhelming sense of humility. His ridiculous confrontation with Mrs. Gable and the police now seemed trivial and small. This was a story not of a suspicious package, but of a kind man's quiet grief and an enduring love that transcended life itself. Alex knew at that moment that he couldn't let the story end with the police report. It had to be about Arthur and Eleanor and their boundless love for animals. He had to be the one to complete the story and honor the beautiful spirit behind the suspicious donation. The story that unfolded on Alex's doorstep was far too bizarre and public to stay contained. Within hours of the police cruisers leaving, a small news clip appeared on the local affiliate, its evening broadcast. "Suspicious package on suburban street leads to bomb squad scare." The footage, shaky and pixelated, was clearly shot from a neighbor's phone, showing the police cars, the caution tape, and a blurred figure of Alex standing on his porch. Social media, however, was where the story truly exploded. Neighbors who had witnessed the events began posting their own accounts, and the comments quickly turned into a meme-filled roast of Mrs. Gable. She was dubbed the HOA's head of Homeland Security and the self-appointed mayor of mayhem. The initial narrative was one of absurd overreaction and suburban comedy. Alex, sitting on his couch and scrolling through the deluge of posts, felt a mix of bewilderment and frustration. His house was a trending topic, and his quiet street was now the subject of public ridicule. But the worst part was that the real story, the beautiful, heartbreaking reason behind the package, was completely lost. He knew he couldn't let it stand. He had to be the one to set the record straight, to tell everyone about Arthur and Eleanor. He sat up late into the night, typing out a message that was honest, heartfelt, and powerful. He attached a clear picture of the open donation box and a close-up of Arthur's handwritten note. He posted it on his personal Facebook page, a move he rarely made, and titled it, "The Full Story Behind the Suspicious Package." The next morning, his phone was buzzing with notifications. His post had been shared hundreds of times. Friends, friends of friends, and even strangers were commenting, not with jokes, but with messages of empathy and support. The story of Arthur, a grieving widower honoring his late wife's love for animals, struck a profound chord with people. The public narrative shifted instantly. The headlines changed. A local online news source, which had originally run a satirical piece, now had a new story. The secret behind the suspicious package is a heartwarming tale of love and loss. They had even gotten a brief, emotional quote from Linda at the Willow Creek Animal Shelter. The ripple effect began immediately, and it started right on Alex's street. The same neighbors who had been secretly laughing at Mrs. Gable were now dropping off donations at Alex's doorstep. A young girl named Mia, whose family lived down the street, set up a small table with a hand-painted sign that read lemonade for Willow Creek and sold cups for donations. Alex, initially overwhelmed, turned his porch into a temporary donation center, the very place where the story had begun. He took pictures and videos of the outpouring of support and shared them online, tagging the Willow Creek Animal Shelter, creating a direct link between the story and the cause. People from all over town, inspired by Arthur's quiet act of kindness, began flocking to the shelter, not just with bags of kibble and old blankets, but with new toys, sturdy beds, and even cash donations. The shelter, which had been struggling to keep its supply stocked, was suddenly overflowing with generosity. A local television station, sensing the momentum, did a full-length feature. The news anchor stood on Alex's front lawn, talking about how a community had come together after a misunderstanding. They showed the shelter, filled to the brim with donations, and introduced Arthur to a wider audience. Arthur, a quiet, humble man, looked bewildered by the attention, but was genuinely moved by the generosity. "I just wanted to do something for Eleanor and the little ones she loved so much," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I never imagined it would become all this." The broadcast captured the emotional heart of the story, highlighting the contrast between the initial fear and the eventual heartwarming outcome. And then there was Mrs. Gable. The public praise for Alex and Arthur was matched only by the public ridicule aimed at her. Her face, once a symbol of righteous indignation, was now a meme. Her name was used in jokes and social media comments to describe anyone who overreacted to a minor event. She became the living embodiment of a Karen stereotype. And the shame of it was something she had never experienced. She had seen her house featured on the news, but as a backdrop to a story of kindness, a story she had nearly ruined. She saw the donation boxes piling up on Alex's porch, the same porch she had called the police on, and the sight was a painful reminder of her own arrogance. The community she so desperately wanted to control had found its true leader in a man she had considered a nuisance, and its true hero in a man she had dismissed as a threat. The positive ripple effect she had unintentionally created was now her personal and very public torment, a bitter lesson in the consequences of judgment without compassion. The storm of attention eventually subsided, leaving behind a profound calm, but its impact rippled across Woodview long after the news crews had packed up and social media moved on to its next viral sensation. The Willow Creek Animal Shelter, once struggling, now thrived. Donations poured in steadily, not just from the initial surge of goodwill, but from newfound patrons and volunteers inspired by Arthur's quiet act of love. Linda, the volunteer coordinator, often remarked that Arthur's simple package had done more for the shelter than any major fundraising campaign ever could. The shelter used the funds to expand their facilities, bringing in more animals and providing better care, transforming it into a vibrant hub of compassion that Eleanor, Arthur's late wife, would have adored. Arthur himself, initially overwhelmed by the attention, found a renewed sense of purpose. People would visit him, thanking him for his kindness, and he slowly began to accept visitors at his home, sharing stories of Eleanor and her devotion to animals. He even started making weekly calls to Linda, no longer just dropping off anonymous gifts, but actively inquiring about the animals and their needs. His grief, while still present, was now intertwined with a comforting sense of contribution and connection. For Alex, the incident was a pivotal moment. The man who once lived a quiet, almost reclusive life was now an accidental local hero. His initial embarrassment had given way to a deep sense of pride and connection to his community. He volunteered at Willow Creek every weekend, helping Linda with whatever was needed, often driving Arthur to the shelter for short, emotional visits. He found a new joy in fostering a few of the older dogs, helping them find their forever homes. The experience had broadened his perspective, showing him the unexpected warmth and generosity that lay beneath the surface of his seemingly ordinary town. He had learned that true kindness often manifested in the quietest ways, and that a single act, misunderstood at first, could ignite a wildfire of compassion. And then there was Mrs. Gable. The public humiliation had been severe, a bitter pill, for a woman who prided herself on being the epitome of propriety. For weeks, she avoided eye contact with Alex, pulling her blinds tighter, and only venturing out for essential errands. The jokes and memes about the HOAS bomb squad slowly faded from the internet, but the memory, for her, was etched in stone. She had become an unwitting symbol of petty overreach, and the sting of it was palpable. One crisp morning, Alex was raking leaves on his lawn when he saw her. She was struggling to carry a heavy bag of groceries up her porch steps, her usual stiff posture slightly slumped. Without thinking, Alex walked over. "Mrs. Gable, let me get that for you." She flinched, startled, and then her eyes narrowed. "I'm perfectly capable, Mr. Peterson," but her voice lacked its usual bite. The bag looked heavy, and her hands trembled slightly. Alex, without waiting for permission, gently took the bag from her. He carried it to her door, placing it carefully inside. "No trouble at all, Mrs. Gable." He turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice barely a whisper, about that package. I suppose I was mistaken." It wasn't an apology, not truly, but for Mrs. Gable, it was a monumental admission. Alex simply nodded, a small, genuine smile on his face. "It's all right, Mrs. Gable. We all learn lessons, sometimes in unexpected ways." He didn't press, he didn't gloat. He simply accepted her meager offering of acknowledgement, understanding that for her, it was an immense effort. The incident served as a quiet reminder to the entire community of Woodview. Not everything suspicious is dangerous, and sometimes, the most ordinary situations can hide the most extraordinary acts of love. The legacy of Eleanor's kindness, channeled through Arthur's simple donation, had transformed a moment of fear and judgment into a catalyst for connection and profound generosity. Alex's doorstep, once the scene of a tense misunderstanding, became a symbol of how a quiet act of kindness, when finally understood, can unite a community, teach a valuable lesson, and leave a lasting, heartwarming impact on everyone involved. The package, once a symbol of fear, was now a testament to enduring love and the power of human compassion.